You ever turn on a brand new sci-fi drama or a fantasy epic with $1 billion budget and you think to yourself, why does this look like a soap opera with a cape? Like it's lit for Instagram and graded at the local Best Buy? You're not really imagining it. Your eyes are noticing something real. It's a weird plasticky clarity. It's faces that are glowing, they're centered, they're spotless. Shadows are lifted just enough to kill the mood, but a little bit of detail remaining. Costumes and landscapes that look more digital and composite than the lived-in worlds. It's often pinned to what people call the Netflix look, and you might have heard of it. But this rabbit hole goes even deeper. Today we're pulling apart how compression codecs, platform specs, digital workflows, and yes, a little algorithmic shorthand have reshaped modern cinematography into something kind of uniform. Often beautiful, but curiously soulless. This isn't a story about bad cameras or lazy directors. It's about how the invisible architecture around cinema, specs, sensors, bit rates, aspect ratios, slowly bends the image. Not with malice, but with math. And yeah, the villain this time, it's not AI, not even executives. It's optimization, taken just a step too far. We'll explore how this shift happens, who's resisting it, and spoilers, some very analog rebels, and why filmmakers are now simulating grain, after stripping it away for years, just to make the image feel real and human again. Let's get this going. Welcome to Riff Theory. That gray sludge feeling. Do you guys remember that infamous episode of Game of Thrones, The Long Night? And it was the one that was all murky that people thought their TV had broken. I actually watched that one on my phone, so I really got the brunt of it. It became a meme overnight, but the conversation kind of missed something a little bit deeper. That hazy and illegible image, it wasn't just an artistic choice. It collided with harsh technical realities, streaming compression. See, when you stream in 4K, you're not really getting cinematic 4K. You're getting a highly compressed version down to around 15 or 18 megabits per second, compared to about 70 to 100 on a 4K Blu-ray. That's a loss of about 70% of data per second. Now, compression isn't a villain, obviously. It's a logistical necessity, but pushing ambitious visuals through a compression funnel can flatten textures, crush details, and blur the nuance out of dimly lit scenes. And so the Netflix look starts to make more sense as we're reaching towards the streaming. Apple, however, does focus a little more money in giving you a higher bit rate, which is why the quality is often better. Here's the kicker. The scene might have looked beautiful in the editing bay, but by the time it reaches your screen, especially on mobile like I had it, or on a spotty Wi-Fi, the shadows have turned into a ghost mush. So the takeaway is that if your favorite prestige drama looks strangely flat or foggy, it might not be the directing, it might be the bit rate, or Netflix, and not necessarily on your end. So what was a movie that looked amazing in theaters, but when you got it home or you saw it on streaming, it was disappointingly bland? I'd like to hear about what you saw and why you think that is down in the comments. Algorithms don't direct, but they do shift the light. It does shape decisions, upstream and downstream. Platforms A/B test thumbnails obsessively, like on YouTube. They track where viewers pause, bounce, rewatch, or drop off, and that data matters for them. It doesn't write dialogue, but it influences the input. You might even reference the Matt Damon and Ben Affleck interview that occurred recently where they discussed this on their film. So back to the executives. They want content that's legible as a thumbnail. So that needs to read fast and on a smartwatch if possible. So certain decisions are going to follow. Faces need to be lit brightly with high contrast for instant facial recognition. They want center framing, easy to crop for vertical formats, for example. Soft shadows, lifted blacks, and crisp edges. They don't want any blotchy dropout during fast playbacks. And the goal is an image that performs across scenarios, for example, phone, TV, TikTok teaser, and subway glare. That doesn't erase the artistry, but it does apply a new pressure to default towards safe visual clarity. And over time, the guidance becomes a habit. Now, there can be an analog made here in the music industry where now you mix for the same idea, CarPlay, headphones, speakers, and you always did that, and there was always more options or for a longer time. But for a very long time, we basically had discs and the theater. So now this is kind of pushing into the cinematography arena. So if you think about it, what happens to the atmosphere of a film when ambiguity gets flagged on a dashboard? The problem starts to become that cinematographers are often adapting lighting and composition not for narrative complexity, but for platform readability. And many of them are not super happy about it. They do talk about it. So have you ever skipped over a show because its thumbnail looked a little blurry or messy, unprofessional, maybe one of my videos, only to find out later that it was quite stunning? Let me know in the comments. Some of the most beloved tools in cinema were excluded, even though they might have specific things like soft highlights, skin warm tone. Some of the most beloved tools in cinema that a director might want to use were excluded from the list. Why? Not true 4K. It's just 3.2K resolution. That's enough for great cinema, but not enough for modern platform specs. So production moves towards sensors like the Red Monstro, Sony Venice, ultra crisp, very sharp, and brilliantly detailed. But under streaming compression, that detail can backfire. Crisp turns clinical, clean turns synthetic, everything starts to look rendered, and you start to feel that Netflix look. Yet these choices have technical justification: archival clarity, cross-device legibility, future-proofing. But when resolution becomes the top-line priority, texture, shadow, depth, and aesthetic grit often lose. So, are there any thoughts on gear obsession in filmmaking? Is it the chase for fidelity that's outpacing the chase for feeling? Do you think it's all Netflix to blame? Do you think it's the directors themselves? Do you think it's an artistic deficit that we're seeing? Let me know in the comments. Now, a takeaway that you should leave here with is streaming platforms choose capture specs for longevity, or at least that's what they think. But those decisions can unintentionally flatten aesthetic diversity, and you start to notice it throughout all the films that go on through Netflix. Now let's talk about the LUT assembly line. Let's talk color. Modern productions rely heavily on LUTs, LUTs, lookup tables, which apply specific visual styles to footage quickly. Think 70s film stock, neon noir, or sunset tones. It's efficient, consistent, and essential to modern post-production. But in aiming for consistency across global teams and delivery schedules, we've also normalized the same looks. Soft teal shadows, orange skin tones, a gentle bloom, shallow depth, and then you repeat it and repeat it. ACES, the industry's standard color pipeline, fortifies this, helping ensure that Studio X's drama doesn't look wildly different on viewer Y's screen. It works, but it also smooths the edges, similar to what Spotify does when leveling all the music together. So the alchemy of film chemistry is unfortunately in a lot of places being replaced by calibrated math. And unless a DP pushes really hard against the grain, these presets become defaults, not decisions. So your takeaway here is that color grading today leans into predictability, turning creative starting points into aesthetic endpoints. This might be an opportunity for small filmmakers to do something that doesn't look as clean as the Netflix look, especially if you're not shooting for Netflix, at least at first. Now, a question for you guys: if you've ever scrolled through shows and thought to yourself, didn't I just watch that? Didn't I see that clip? Even though it was a completely different series, because it all looks the same? Let me know about your experience on that in the comments. I'd appreciate that. Now let's talk about one of the biggest problems we have: shooting for the scroll and framing for the feed. Let's stare into the frame. Traditional aspect ratios like 2.39 to 1 give filmmakers some room to breathe. Negative space was emotional space, but today, the battling dimensions of mobile trailers and TikTok crop zones and Instagram teasers are squeezing compositions into the center third. That's not a conspiracy, it's a pragmatic pivot that these filmmakers have made. Marketing demands vertical trailers. Platform guidelines call for center-safe content, so cinematographers are forced to adapt. Faces are center-aligned, action is in the middle third, and widescreen edges get quiet intentionally and unfortunately. It's not just about the platforms either. People are watching prestigious series in bed, on buses, on foldable screens. The frame has to work everywhere. And is that inherently bad? Not always. Center framing has deep artistic roots, from Kubrick to Wes Anderson, but when it's driven by formatting demands rather than narrative or emotional intent, it becomes a contaminant, something that's tying the hands of directors or future creators. So if you think about it, what gets lost when you compose every story from the same screen shape? Can you tell me a time when you were shooting and realized when you went to share it on social media how it didn't work at all? A takeaway here is that you should stay versatile across screens. It's something that's a reality of the modern day. Cinematography today often prioritizes center-safe compositions over spatial storytelling. Maybe you can play off of that. That's an interesting angle to take. Now, a question for you guys. Have you ever watched something in a theater and felt that the frame was fully used, beautifully cinematic, but it wasn't meant to be scrolled, or was it meant to be scrolled? How would it translate? Let me know what you guys think there. And now, the grain strikes back. Here's where it gets a little bit weird and a little bit poetic. Netflix is the poster child for clinical clarity. It is now building tech that adds grain back in. So they strip the texture during compression to save bandwidth, and then they reintroduce it later using film grain synthesis inside newer codecs like AV1. That means your perfectly compressed, smoothed out image, it's getting artificial texture applied on during playback, like a filter dialed in by metadata. So why are they doing this? Because they've realized people are calling it the Netflix look and that it's too clean, too sterile, and texture makes it feel richer and more human. Meanwhile, filmmakers like Nolan, Tarantino, and Fennell are pushing hard in the opposite direction, capturing on 35mm or IMAX, saturating the image with imperfections, not as a nostalgia, but as a resistance to the modern streaming film. They're baking it into every frame, and not just with fidelity. Now, an engagement question for you guys. Would you rather stream something pristine and smooth or visually textured, even if it occasionally chokes your Wi-Fi? Let me know what's the most important for you down in the comments. Alright guys, so let's bring it all home and give you guys some actionable takeaways. So today's cinematic sameness doesn't come from a lack of talent, it comes from optimizing too well, or being forced to optimize too well, for algorithms, for devices, for horizontal and vertical framing, and bit rates and deliverables. So we're not seeing failure here, we're seeing systems working as they're intended. They're just not intended for the soul, at least from Netflix's perspective. So when clarity becomes king, mystery gets exiled, and it becomes interesting again. But here's the good news. Systems can be rewired, and standards can flex, and creativity, when cornered, always adapts. That's a theme we always talk about here. So your actionable insights, something that you can actually take away from here are, if you are a creator, cinematographer, filmmaker, don't just grab the defaults. Use it as a sketch, any template you might have, for example. Don't use it as a signature. Make your own. Texture doesn't need to be analog, but it does need to be a deliberate choice. If you're a technologist or a producer, for example, ask not just what the pipeline demands, but what it also erodes. Flexibility isn't an inefficiency necessarily. It's creative bandwidth, and that is your job, creativity. If you're just a viewer, not just a viewer, we need viewers, wonderful viewers. Experiment, compare a Blu-ray film, stream it, watch it in the theater. Notice what changes or what disappears. See how the light, grain, and movement were meant to feel originally and how they feel when streamed to Netflix. And for all of us, a takeaway is defend the friction. In visuals, in sound, in process, the little hiccups, the anomalies, and the moments that resist automation. Those are often where all the meaning lives and the things that really resonate with us. So we're not going backwards, but maybe we don't need to be so eager to smooth the path forward that might erase all the beautiful footprints we made along the way. So we should let some shadows stay dark, and we should figure out a way to make that happen from the director's point of view, not being told to do it. Alright guys, that's it. You've been listening to Riff Theory. If this episode helped you see through some of the pixels, we've got a much more below the surface. So please visit rifffitters.com, unravel some fresh lore, or browse our artifact shop where we blur the line between handcrafted and machine-made art, and plug into our newsletter over at Substack, or catch our essays on Medium or through your favorite RSS reader. And of course, follow the Riff Theory on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or here on YouTube through the Riff Fitters Network, and find us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and everywhere else, because nothing challenges the algorithm quite like surprising you left and right. Thanks very much, guys, for being here. My name is Chris. This has been Riff Theory. I will see you next week.